guess the secret of life is to stop and take a breath when you're feeling a panic, right? I mean, if you don't do that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's happening just in your mind, and Mike can really F with you. It's like, wait a second, nothing's
Yeah.
happening. It's right here. I'm creating a scenario. It's easier done than said. Easier said than done, I should say. Welcome back to Beyond the Bar podcast. I'm your host, Denisa Tova, and today's guest wears many hats. He's an attorney, mediator, cannabis policy advocate, musician, outdoorsman, one heck of a skier, and a deep thinker. His name is Andrew Schriever, and he's a co-founder of Holland Schriever LLP. And I would say that he shaped legal, civic, and cultural conversations throughout New York and beyond. And this one's going to be fun. I know that. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's a lot to live up to. I hope I can, if I meet half the introduction, then it should be an interesting enough conversation. So we'll do our best.
That's your story. I know it is. You're very modest. We chatted just a little bit and we just scratched the tip of the iceberg. From what you shared with me, it seemed like your journey didn't follow this, I don't want to say rigid blueprint, but really, well, it's anyone's blueprint, but you sort of, it evolved organically is what I'm trying to say. What were the moments that helped you realize that law, and especially mediation, was the right path for you?
Sure. Well, I mean, the law piece, that kind of, that's one of those, didn't always want to be an astronaut necessarily. I don't have the constitution for it, definitely. But when I was in high school, there's certain things I tell my kids this. It's like if there are things that you feel like you gravitate toward and they kind of feel like it's a natural fit, organic, like the word you used, uh, then try to sort of go where your passions lead you. So I went to a New York City public school. It wasn't the best school in New York City, but they did have a really good law program, which is rare for a high school. And there was a very good teacher, Miss Schwartz. I'll give her a shout out. I don't know if she's still teaching, but that was a while ago. And she had 3 core classes in the high school that taught about basic law and what it's like to be a lawyer and all that. But there were all these New York City competitions where you got to pretend to be a lawyer, mock trial, moot court, model city council, things like that. And for me at the time, it was just kind of like, it was fun and kind of, I won't say easy, but just sort of like thrilling. And it felt like, some people know how to throw and catch really well. I'm definitely not one of those people, but I felt like when it came to pretending to be a lawyer, I could throw and catch really pretty well. And I remember during mock trial, it's the comments you hear, the offhand comments you hear from somebody in passing that sort of give you some inspiration. And there was a lawyer who was the judge in a mock trial competition in a courtroom in the city. And he turned to me and he said, he could really see me, like, I mean, he singled me out. He said, I could see everyone doing a good job, but I really see you the most being the guy who walks into a courtroom with a sort of battered briefcase. And, I remember he used that term and it sort of stuck with me.
Oh,
So I use a knapsack, a backpack now, not a battered briefcase, but it's the same idea. So yeah, it's sort of, I mean, it's been recursive. I from high school, I didn't just sort of go straight through and say, I'm going to be a lawyer forever. I figured I'd dip my toe in a few things, but ultimately it's where I landed. And I think it's kind of where my instincts took me. And the mediation part, well, it
yeah.
didn't exist when I was a kid. That really was a creature of, that started coming out in the 90s with the Harvard Negotiation Project. I was just in college at that time. I didn't know anything about that. I learned about that in law school, where I first studied mediation, read Getting to Yes, which is a sort of, primer for that sort of thing. And, took a full course in it, really kind of became enamored by the process and realized that, litigation is about conflict and conflict resolution. And that at the time I was in law school, which is the late 90s, that was sort of a new idea. And since then, I've latched into it. And for the last 20 something years, I've kind of made it a core of my practice. And it's fun. I like to say I fix fights when I can.
Right. That's interesting. So what was it? Do you remember what was it, the feeling that drew in high school? What was it that drew you to really to feeling like, you know what, that's something that I could actually enjoy potentially,
Mhm.
because then it led you to sort of traditional litigation, wouldn't you say? And then if you were to compare into the feeling that you get out of doing a mediation, it almost feel like, Those are two different things.
Well, they're two different things. I mean, they're both a sport in a sense. Litigation sort of speaks for itself, right? I mean, that's pretty
Sure.
much as easy a sports analogy as you can get. But there's a sport in the sense of it comes with a skill set. You need to work with others in order for it to work, and there is a certain way to play it when it comes to mediation. So in both respects, there's a certain level of what I'll call game theory, at play. Um, and both are actually uniquely tailored for different situations. I always say litigation is a means to an end. It's not, people, they lose track of the fight, of the sight, that they're not fighting, to get the piece of paper that says I win, because the
Hmm.
piece of paper is just a piece of paper. Usually, at least in civil lawsuits, commercial real estate disputes, things like that. You want something, money, somebody, did something, and you're entitled to something as a result, contract, performance, and all that. So it's when you bring the lawsuit, what you're really doing is generating leverage. You're generating a reason for the other side to come to the table if they haven't already. And then what you do when you really want to sort of like figure out how to get out of the lawsuit, which every good attorney should be trying to think of when they start the lawsuit, right? What's my exit strategy? Do I have to take it all the way to the end? 90% of the time, the answer is no. So you have to be good at both, because if you do have to take it to the end, then people can't call your bluff. You can't just say, well, most cases are going to settle, so I'm not ready to go to court. And I had a great professor in law school that said you win by being prepared, right? So the better a litigator you are, the better a mediator you are, and a better negotiator you are, because A, you know your case much better if you're prepared to litigate it. But you also know, if you're really sort of like, kind of enlightened about how you look at it, that that the process of litigation is to get to an ending, right? So is a settlement conversation. So if somebody owes you $1 million and you sue them for the $1 million, well, you can litigate and get through trial and get to that end. If you can settle it and get to a net basis where you're pretty much getting away with the same kind of recovery, at least net of what you'd spend to get there and getting rid of the risks, then both processes get you to the same goal. But one process necessarily sometimes needs to help the other, because not everybody's going to come to mediation, just saying, well, I'm mad at you, so let's come and, do it through this process. People sometimes need to be dragged there, which means you need the leverage of the
Yeah.
litigation. So
Yeah.
to actually work hand in glove. And the thing I learned early, which a lot of attorneys really should be wise to sort of take note of, is that you have to wear two different hats when you're doing either
Hmm.
or.
That is really interesting, because the players really are both the parties in that conflict, whether they're divorcing parties or whatever type of they're mediating, whatever conflict they're mediating. And then we have the representing attorneys, and they're all really part of the game. Is there a conversation that you have, because one thing that is a wild card, as prepared as you can be, are human emotions, right? Is
Right.
there a sort of a ritual, a speech that you give them in the beginning?
Yeah. So this ties into, I know this is something that that at this point people kind of come to expect when they've worked with me a few times. I always kind of give the same talk, and I boil it down to basically two points of comparison. And what I really want to do is basically make the process accessible, because the lawyers know what's going on, but a lot of times the clients, this might be their first mediation, their first litigation, and they're really sort of like intimidated, and they really kind of need to understand, how do I make this work? And most people who come into a mediation room have not studied negotiation theory. So what I try to do is boil it down to basically two concepts, both of which stand for the core practical sort of principle that people care most about themselves, their own self-interest, right? It's a line in The Godfather Part 2. Let's just say you'll help me because it's in your self-interest to help me. I believe that. And I
Yeah.
actually tell people, like, let's take that at face value, that you're here only for yourself. Don't think about the other person. Well, what's the best way for me to make a decision about whether this is a good settlement or a bad settlement? Well, what you really need to be able to do is to analyze the data to figure out, well, what's really going to happen if this thing goes forward? Is this going to be good for me or bad for me if I have to litigate it to the end? And you need to be able to make a rational decision based on that data. But most
Mm.
people have trouble doing that because they're in the middle of a litigation, which means they're angry. It comes with the territory.
Yeah.
And so I try to sort of boil it down to two very simple analogies that I think everybody can kind of latch into. No, and I talk about it in terms of doctors and robots, right? What I say in terms of a doctor, I use a very simple snippet. I talk about, and this is true, I was flipping through the channels one day, back when you could when television was a thing, right? And I came across this old show House, which is about this really, genius, very, very temperamental, angry doctor. And he's going with a group of interns he's checking in with them. And one of them says to him, I've done this examination on the wife. There's nothing we could do. We can't operate. It's only a matter of time. She's not going to make it. And he says, did you tell the husband? And he goes, you want me to go in there and tell the wife that she has absolutely no chance of surviving? And House looks at the intern and he says, sort of deadpan, no, I want you to lie to him, right? And it's just this sort of like moment of biting sarcasm from this sort of genius doctor, but it's sort of like brought home to me. It was a shockwave kind of, thing to say to an intern who's, a deer in headlights. Like the message is, you have to tell this patient what the patient needs. You need to tell the husband what he needs to know. You can't lie to him. You can't give him false hope. Right. And so I always sort of carry that through think about it. If you're in an examination room with a doctor, would you rather have a doctor with the not so great bedside manner, but tells you everything you need to know so that you can make a good decision about yourself and what you're going to do for your health? Or would you rather have a doctor that cares more about your feelings, or maybe the doctor's feelings, and doesn't want to necessarily break the bad news to you, or tries to sugarcoat it, or dances around it, right? Anybody who cares about their own self-interest would choose the rude doctor, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about that, what I tee up is the idea, and this works both in the context of litigation, but also dispute resolution generally, that if you go through the exercise of putting yourself in an examination room, in other words, a room where nobody else can hear or see or think about what you're thinking, right? So that it is sacrosanct. It is like a doctor's room. The only people that you're speaking to in there are the doctor, right? And you, and maybe a member of your family. In this situation, when we mediate, we meet privately in that examination room. And I tell people, we're going to do what doctors do. We're going to look at your case like a patient. And we're going to say candidly, dispassionately, this looks good for your patient. This doesn't look good for your patient. I would worry about this if I were you. Only for one reason, so that the patient can do what patients are legally have a right to, which is to make a decision based on informed consent. Lawyers are bound by the same standard. So if a lawyer doesn't walk their client through the same level of analysis of risks that a case may present that a doctor does with their patient, the lawyer is really not living up to their own standard of what they're supposed to do for a client. So when we mediate, we do that together. And when we do it, I give them that warning so that they're not ready to confront me back. You don't hear from your doctor, you've got pneumonia, and then you slam your fist on the table and say, no, I don't. No, the pneumonia is lying to you. It's just a fact, right? So if you say your case, you want this, but your contract actually says specifically you can't get it, you know what? I'm not telling you that because I even care about what you think of me. I'm telling you that because my job is to make sure you know that before you say yes or no to what's on the table. So that's the doctor part. And then real briefly, the robot part, after we've sort of done that, I say, I want everybody to basically do something called robot math. And it basically rests on this proposition. If I say to a robot who's suing somebody, robot, you lost $14 as a result of what the bad guy did, right? You're suing somebody, you want $14. And I keep the number simple, keep it simple, right? And then I say, but robot, you're going to have to pay your attorney $11. And let's assume that you have a 100% chance of winning, right? Well, first robot, my first question is, what's your net when you win? Robot says $3. Great, your calculator's working. Robot, today we're in a settlement discussion. The other side is offering us $4. What do you want to do, right? Now, any robot that is a robot would say, I will definitely take that $4. Maybe I'll see if I can get a little more than $4, but at base, I'm taking that $4. Why? Because the math is such that if I don't take the $4 now, I'm going to get less by winning. And that assumes that you have a 100% chance of winning before you even get into whether there's a risk that you might lose, right? So what I tell people is this is a two-way street. If you have more in front of you on a net basis, then you're very likely going to wind up getting after spending what it costs to win. And there's a risk of losing, and you get equal to or greater than that amount now, then what possible rational, objective, non-emotional reason can you have to say no to that? And that last bit is the key to it. Robots don't have pesky emotions, right? And so I say to people, you don't have to ultimately make the decision the robot makes, and you don't ultimately have to take your doctor's advice. But you do have to go through those two exercises, because only then can you really have an objective understanding with the benefit of somebody who really doesn't care. And that's the power of a mediator, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I say that, and I say that to people all the time. Like, honestly, this is going to surprise you, but I don't care if the case settles. What I care about is that you all give yourselves the sort of respect that it takes to analyze your case for yourself and know what you need to know to make an informed decision. When people do that, and then for the rest of the day, all I have to do is say, what would a robot do? What would a doctor do? You know, after that 10-minute spiel, and that will navigate the day, because in any moment where somebody's sort of flying off the handle and being untethered, I'd say, okay, that's great, but that's not the doctor or the robot talking. That's the pissed off litigant. Fine, let's just know that so that you can sort of put them in their own category, step outside of it. And in any conflict, the more you can step outside of it and sort of recognize what's silly about it and what's not silly about it, the better you're going to do at making decisions that ultimately are better for you. And that's the difference between, you know, I read something last year about the difference between a reaction and a response. Reactions are what they sound like, a reaction. Somebody does something, the emotions take over, the adrenaline takes over, you say something. A response is something that you do after you go through this exercise, right? And that's really what you want to do. You want to respond, not react. Reaction is a sign of weakness. Response is a sign of emotional intelligence, right? So that's, I mean, it's a lot, and I guess that is a little heady, but when you boil it down to sort of like practical use,
Yeah.
it's really very granular. It's very organic, and it's very reachable, you know, attainable to sort of do it that way. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. You as you think about these things over the years, you sort of develop ways to just give names to the things that you're doing, and that's just basically my shorthand. You know?
No,
So you
that
just give away all my
definitely.
secrets. You don't need me anymore. People don't need me.
That's right. No, that is so brilliantly clear and simple.
Appreciate it.
It's and it's almost like, you know, when you have parties to a divorce, and I say parties, players, divorce to mediation, litigation, it's like you also equated it to yourself with a sport. And my observation is, you know, there are people, it's almost like they they revel in just the whole process. I'm feeling like I have nothing to lose. I'll just, you know, prolong it, and who cares? And I've seen it on both the practitioner side and the litigant side, or the parties to mediation sort of. But then, you know, they, for people like that, they sort of weed themselves out because it's pretty clear, cut and dry. The way you describe it, this is how it is, and you know what? And if you can't, um, if this doesn't work for you, it's then they fall off, and I guess try to litigate. But yeah, that's it. It really shouldn't be that complicated.
It's not. I mean, and I think when we spoke the first time, I had mentioned to you, I have this other sort of working analogy in the back of my head, which just comes from being a recovering English major, so to speak. I think I mentioned this. It's the idea that, and I came to appreciate this more as a litigator, but one thing we study pretty intently as English majors, and even in high school, most of us study this, it's the idea of a tragedy, right? And without getting too geeky about it, one of the central sort of figures, or the main theme of a tragedy, is that the person in the middle of it, you know, Macbeth, Hamlet, whatever, uh, generally speaking, they have this tragic flaw that they just can't get over. Whatever it is, it's stopping them from doing the thing they need to do. Generally speaking, it's pride, right? I'm not going to let that person win. And generally in the story, the tragic hero, the person in the middle, only realizes at the end that it's sort of too late, right? And in the most standard sort of classic form from Greek days, Oedipus and all that, there's a chorus that yells from the side of the stage every now and then, don't do this thing that you're about to do. In Oedipus, it's like, don't sleep with your mom and kill your dad. Chorus basically says that, and Oedipus just says, that's silly, I'm going to ignore that, right? The
Yeah,
chorus in this case is the mediator, right?
yeah, yeah,
Don't like, don't litigate over a contract you're going to lose.
yeah,
What you're really doing in this process is you're sort of helping to understand that probably pride is at the core of it, and that's why the robot really helps, because you say it out loud, then people will say, okay, I get it. We understand we're human beings. So you tell people, I know pride, fairness, principle, that is going to be clogging your head as we talk about this. But I worked with a mediator who was an ex-judge who used to say that his courtroom was littered with the floors of people the floors of his courtroom were littered with people who came seeking justice, the bodies of people who came seeking justice, right? Because generally speaking, you're going to be disappointed in court.
yeah.
You're not going to get the thing you think you're going to get.
No.
So
No. You know, when I used to do mediation, this was like a decade, two decades ago, actually, I used to explain to the clients, my analogy was you take a big piece of paper, and that represents your story. And then when you get to litigation, if you choose to go that route, you know, you fold it in half, and that's basically what your attorney keeps in their file as you tell them, as you retell your story, and then you fold it further in half, and that's what the attorney tries to convey to the court and the judge. And the judge, you fold it again in a half, where you have a really little square, a little tiny piece of paper, and based on that, judge renders, you know, the final decision that will impact the rest of your life. So you guys pick and choose.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
that's
mean, the control element, that's the other sale point. You know, it's better
yeah,
to choose your fate than to have it chosen for you, even if you think you're going to win.
yeah. No, that's interesting. You know, you are really fascinating to me that, you know, engaging both parts of your brain, switching back to something like skiing. And I mentioned skiing just because, you know, I spent a good amount of time in Colorado, and we talked about, I think you picked it up, was it later on in life, and just like totally fell in love with it.
Yeah, I was 29 when I first I was 29 when I first seriously got on skis, never took a lesson. I mean, I think there were two
Wow.
times in my life when I put skis on and that just should not have happened. And I never got, more feet like at a, tiny hill. But for real, like I started skiing when I was 29, like for like, and yeah, since then it's become a complete passion for me. I'm older than 29 now, you know, by a lot. Uh, and it's actually, yeah, I was never, it's sort of like I said earlier, I'm not really the guy who could throw or catch a ball, and I was never really an athlete, but all of a sudden and it actually took a long time. It's like, but I sort of enjoyed it, but I was afraid of it, for the first 5 years. Like I get
Mm.
up to the top of the mountain, I'd kind of hyperventilate a little bit. A lot of people I think go through that, but then you get over this hump where suddenly like the skill set kicks in, and and you're safe. Like you can stop, you can do what the things you need to do to be a safe and competent skier. And then all of a sudden, like anything else, it's like the things that are supposed to happen start happening, and you just get better, and it becomes organic, and you develop this muscle memory. So every year I've been trying to make up for the loss of my first 29 years and never getting the snow. So every year I try to go out more and more and push myself. But it's interesting. I feel like a little bit of a Benjamin Button thing. I'm getting more athletic as I get older, simply, but that's easy because when you were never athletic at all, then it's really not that big a hurdle to pick up on. But it's nice to have that sort of meditation too. Like
Yeah, meditation. Yeah,
yeah,
I think you're right. When you start carving those terms, and just like taking it all in, what
yeah.
what has been like a frightening moment where you get yourself in, I don't know, in a tree line, or you know, you were, I don't know, you were, I guess it was more than you chewed, and you're like, oh shoot, I gotta, how do I get out of it?
Gosh. Well, that's such a great question because it's also a marker, right? Because
Mhm.
5 years ago, there were things where I would be completely like frozen, and now I can do like those things now for me are not hard, right?
Mhm.
But I remember actually one really specific moment where we were skiing at Gore Mountain, which is a good mountain, part of the Olympic, New York mountains, and they have a double black called Lies, which is next to one of the steepest double blacks on like the East Coast. It's short, but it's very, very steep. And I sort of like, I tend to sort of work my body in one. I lean more to the right than the left. I guess it's just a righty thing. So I came in from the sort of wrong side where I'm really not comfortable making the sharp turn down the mogul. So basically, I had, I don't know. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Like, this level of like steepness that I kind of, no, I mean, I'm trying to get this done right with the computer, but really, really, really steep. And unless I was able to cut the turn, I was gonna like just roll over, head over, and then without enough of a kind of base, so that was going to be a pretty steep fall. I actually remember that moment pretty specifically. So I mean, and those are great life moments because they sort of teach you, all right, well, right now you're not being injured, right now you're just standing here feeling this. So the
Yeah.
first thing you're going to do is you're just going to sort of reposition yourself and sort of like you're going to take a breath, wait until you're calm, reposition yourself, sort of back it up a little bit, and basically I just was able to turn my body in a way where I kind of hit my comfort level on my stance, and then then it really wasn't too much. But I think that's kind of what I love about it. It's you can always just sort of push it, and you know, the beauty of it is you're on a mountain, so you can always find that extra bit of challenge that's not too far to be unsafe, but far enough to sort of say, yeah, you know what, you can sort of build your level of confidence in this. But I don't know, I guess the secret of life is to stop and take a breath when you're feeling a panic, right? I mean, if you don't do that, then
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's happening just in your mind, and mind can really F with you. It's like, wait a second, nothing's
yeah,
happening. It's right here. I'm creating a scenario. It's easier done than said. Easier said than done, I should say.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
no, do you like skiing with other people, like with friends, or is this just like a solo thing for you?
So I mean, I always enjoy going with friends. My wife's a much better skier than me, so I'm really happy to ski with her anytime. And anybody who wants to go skiing with me, I'm really happy to do it. I enjoy the sort of like chilling out on the chairlift and just sort of shooting the breeze. In the same breath, though, like on those days where I get out on my own, it takes like it's a different kind of joy. Because the other thing is I tend to be a bit impatient, almost like a kid making up for lost time. So like I'll get on at 8:30 in the morning when the lift opens and be off at 4 o'clock in Colorado when it's just closing. And I tend to just sort of be a lunatic. I don't know why. It's just I get it out of my system, but it takes a lot to get it out. It takes days and days and days and days. So when I get to sort of just open it up and it's just me, where I don't have to sort of wait or like sort of keep my eye out for who I'm with or anything like that. And I don't think about or look at a map. I just sort of like get thrown onto one slope and just sort of like my skis take me here. And okay, now I'm on a completely different part of the mountain. And it's totally random. Those are, yeah,
Wow.
those are sort of irreplaceable. So again, it's different joy. That coupled with you listen to music one ear so you can hear everything else going on around you. Um, that kind of
With
helps
one
too.
ear, yeah. Music. You
Yeah.
play, how many instruments do you play?
Um,
What do you play?
yeah, I'm sort of cataloging it. I play guitar and banjo and piano and ukulele and um, mandolin, blues harp. I think that's it. Those are the big ones. I mean, I've messed around with other string instruments, but those are the main ones.
When did you
Gotta keep
start?
yourself busy. I was 4 when I started
Or
playing piano. Yeah. So I mean, that's I for our kids, it was essential that we just not only have instruments everywhere in the house, but that we had them start to learn to play when they were that age too. Because for me, it's sort of it's not a life skill, but it's a life joy to at least know the fundamentals of it. Um, but it's like everything else, people either sort of have aptitude or gravitate, and among all the things that I'm horrible at, music is one of those things like law that I just sort of like picked up a piano and then a guitar and uh, never played to a point where anybody who's a musician would say, my God, that guy's great. But anybody who's not a musician would say, wow, that guy's pretty good. So I guess, that gets me through for most of it. And I do actually love playing with other musicians. Uh,
you have a band?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. What's the name of the band?
Band is Greetings from Anywhere. We've been together since 2009. Long time. Yeah.
That's and then as far as like picking up the other instruments, what's the process of learning another instrument?
Well, a lot of this goes back to, and this is why piano is such a great starter instrument. A piano is actually a map for music theory. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. This is a completely different podcast, but the gist of it is that music, and this is somebody who really is terrible at math, but music works so mathematically that most of music can be defined by formulas. And music theory is not only the sort of study of how those formulas work and interact, but more how the logic of them work and interact. So it's sort of like not just memorizing numbers and calculations, it's knowing how the numbers work together, right? So on guitar, for example, the strings are separated by intervals between the notes on a scale, all right? So, usually in fifths, except for the B string, which is in fourths. And that means or half steps, I should say. And basically what that basically means is that there is in every instrument a self-contained map where if you basically learn the grid, right, then the fingering, in terms of where you're supposed to put your fingers to make the chord, becomes pretty self-explanatory. It's very logical. So a banjo, for example, is tuned almost like a guitar, except that it has a really short string up top that's a high G string that's always sort of playing. And then what would be a low E is a D. But for guitarists who studied things like, Neil Young, who used to tune their guitar that way anyway, we used to learn how to play those songs. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, I know how to play the banjo, right? Because we learned how to play, different ways people sort of played with these instruments, when people like Stephen Stills in particular, like, and Pete Townsend, those guys were great. Right? Any musician would understand when you talk about drop D tuning, whatever. But that's the gist.
No,
so yeah.
This is really great. We do have I've had quite a few musicians on the podcast. I remember one of them, she's a lefty, and she I think she came out with a guitar for lefties, and I mean, she can put out some serious licks. She's amazing.
That's great.
And it's just so electrifying. And there's something you said about, with having your children learn an instrument. I remember we share stories, and I mentioned we were my mom, she was sort of stationed for work in China. We were there at the Czech embassy, and it was actually comical because she insisted that we take some languages and then we take some music lessons, and it was a first recorder and then also a guitar. So I was like 8 years old. First I sort of dreaded it, but then it just became it was like a form of escape. It was there's something about it, learning new language and then learning new instrument. And it opens up a entirely different part of your brain. Yeah.
For me, it's actually, it's the most self-soothing, healthiest thing I have. I mean, to a point where I won't travel without either a guitar or a ukulele, some instrument in my bag. Because if I'm just feeling antsy, I'll pull it out and just play it, and I'll just feel better. I mean, I know I'm not unique. I know there are millions of people who are musicians who can be like, oh, absolutely, that's what you do. It's a great thing. I mean, for me, the whole takeaway of all of this is basically like the only reason I'm good at any of this stuff is simply because those are the things that that I knew how to do. I just avoided all the stuff that I'm horrible at, and that's
simple.
That's a longer show. That's a much longer show.
Yeah. No, that's and then tell me about I don't think we talked about it, your involvement in the cannabis industry.
Sure, yeah. So some years back now, I guess 2015, it must have been or it was around, it was basically, it was around 2016, 2017. And New York was on the verge, or not on the verge, but they were starting for the first time in a long time to have serious discussions about bringing legalization. And, since other states had already started doing that, it was pretty much a matter of time. But I was watching that debate pretty closely. And it kind of came to a head in my capacity of being on the board of directors of our bar association in Westchester. Because a couple of colleagues of mine had come up with the idea of founding this cannabis law committee, sort of recognizing that this policy was evolving and kind of taking off. And so, maybe we as a bar should sort of study it since it's about to be a new legal market. I thought it was a great idea. All the people, the sort of like the judges in the room and the sort of like Westchester sort of, legal elite all agreed that this was a really good idea. And for me, I'd always thought that criminalizing possession was just disgusting for all the reasons that you can talk about, from it being a racially charged reason to put people in jail, to the fact that, for people who choose it for adult use, it's actually a healthy alternative to alcohol. I mean, that also is its own podcast. But what I saw is an opportunity to sort of use my quote power, my position, which at that time was sort of coming up in the Bar Association leadership, and eventually to become president of the county bar a couple of years later, to sort of like use that platform as a way to kind of like get in on the policy. Because at the time, the policy that New York was talking about was coming up with a legal market that would actually like pay attention to the fact that there were so many wrongs from the war on drugs, which is really a war on people, right? That's just it's a euphemism. So I was pretty excited to form a policy think tank with my current partner, David Holland. We just formed our own law firm now after 7 years of sort of working on policy together, and doing some cannabis work together as lawyers. And he was like somebody who was a heavy hitter in the cannabis space. He was former counsel to High Times Magazine and head of Empire State Normal. So he had submitted Supreme Court briefs on the topic. I mean, the guy's just a wonk and a genius. And so I thought I could kind of learn from him, and he and I have kind of become, cohorts in not in crime, but in decriminalization, right? So since then, we've been doing good work. We've been, we helped to influence policy in the state by forming a think tank, industry association in the city in Hudson Valley that really actually put together a lot of important materials that we sent to the legislature while the law was being written and the regs were being written. And now it's kind of it's a good cause, and we're picking it up on a national scale too. We've aligned ourselves with some leading lawyers around the country to form something called THCA.law, the Hemp and Cannabis Attorneys. THCA, cute, because THC.
Yeah.
.law, where we're sort of working now on national policy, state by state, to kind of help out with municipalities that are overreaching and trying to sort of overregulate. So it's a brand new territory, a brand new field, and really, really fascinating stuff, and
Oh yeah. No, it is fascinating stuff. It's kind of like, you're gonna laugh. It's like AI, right? Or like the Uber. People first, they're afraid of it.
Yeah.
And they say never. It's like, would you imagine that you're gonna put your 13-year-old daughter, in a car with a stranger? I know,
Right.
and now you're doing it. So it's the unknown, and it's interesting. And someone who had lost a child to to addiction. It was a lot of PTSD, and it was just a lot of complicating factor, an adult son. But I wish that there was an access to that, and more information. And so I'm glad that you're normalizing something like that. That the conversation is happening.
It's and I'm really, I mean, it's devastating to hear about that. And one of the things that I strongly believe in is that education about all of this is pretty critical. And the more you leave it all illegal and don't talk about it, the more not only do you stigmatize it in the people that use it, but you drive them to feel kind of like they don't have anybody to talk to. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and I would imagine that if you brought into the mediation, if you made it a little bit of cannabis and some music, you'd be settling cases. The courts would be out of business. So.
Yeah, I mean, the three do sort of intersect. Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of running gag about how I've sort of culminated my profession so that all of those things seem to fit with each other, even though they sort of shouldn't for somebody who's a professional lawyer who does all this serious work. But it is about people just sort of. I think it's an old lyric, the times they are a changing, but I think that's absolutely true. And I think that the new generation is completely different than what we were.
Oh yeah, yeah. Look, that's the gist of this podcast. The vulnerability being. I don't want to throw the word authentic as a label, because if you want to be authentically an asshole, do it on someone else's feed, or time. But just expressing yourself and your thoughts, and and I think a lot of the aggression, what we see, just comes from suppression. We bring it. Our generation of parents, now that they didn't have the tools, but they buried stuff. I was raised by an Eastern European mother back in the communist bloc, and so it was she's very disciplined. You didn't share what was on your mind or about your feelings. You kind of kept it to yourself, and you worked hard. And so definitely things are changing, and it's important to talk about stuff. You don't understand it, ask questions. You're afraid of it, ask questions, or talk about it.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because I see that from my point of view as a parent, but I also think about my parents' generation and theirs. I've sort of kind of observed it in the sense that my grandparents' generation didn't have the luxury to sort of think about anything other than survival and keeping it all inside, because they just needed to put food on the table, you know. And with each generation, as you can worry less about putting food on the table and more about saving for your kids' college tuition, I think you have the luxury of being able to be more, you know, to tackle the other things that make human beings, like emotions. But I feel like, you know, like what you said about your mom, you know, it's the American immigrant story in a lot of ways, and I could easily talk about my grandparents in the same exact sort of way. Like, who had time for,
Yeah.
you know, therapy? I mean, what? No, just get it done. Like, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. No, the strangers, they don't need to know about our business. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
no, very true. And like you said, I mean, we just scratched the surface. I would love to have you back. I mean, there's just so much that we can talk about. Any parting thoughts?
I mean, no, other than it's flattering that you have me on. I know that you do have people who are very accomplished, and so, you know, an honor to be just nominated, like they say. And you know, I hope that people, you know, take away something from this talk, and maybe some of the stuff we talked about. I don't know. I like to sort of encourage people to take all that highfalutin mediation stuff I talk about and actually think about ways where, really, on a very, very simple level, can you sort of make yourself your own doctor, your own robot in any moment? Like if you're fighting with your brother, you know, which still happens as adults, right? I mean,
Yeah.
take a step back and try to do that. Like, what's really going on here? Because that sort of like ability to do that, it's a lot easier, like you said than done. But if you learn that skill, which is, you know, a constant thing that you have to kind of teach yourself, it actually does kind of pay off. So, you know, hopefully that little tidbit gave somebody something to think about.
Very, very good advice.
Yeah.
And then recognizing that what you carry with you, that's just, you know, accumulation of circumstances and your upbringing, and you will never probably see things exactly the same way. And recognizing that whatever triggering you has nothing to do with the other person, unless of course they're trying to directly harm you. It's just your reaction to the environment. And to me, it's staying curious and then learning the skills that you just talked about will go a long way. So thank you again. I mean, this was really one of the most layered, I'd say, thoughtful conversations I've had. So thank you again.
That's high praise. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
And those of you who are listening and viewing Beyond the Bar podcast, you can find links to Andrew's work and music in the episode's description. And make sure that you follow us on all social media channels and subscribe to Beyond the Bar podcast. And until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.